Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our storage design and modeling working group for Uplift and DEB out, outage management and state of charge management. My name is Brenda Marquez. On behalf of the stakeholder affairs at the California ISO, we welcome you to today's meeting. We will be covering a few topics. I wanted to quickly introduce Sergio Dueñas Melendez, who is our storage manager for this also policy initiative and also other ones. We also wanted to quickly introduce that we'll be also promoting a few folks from the ISO as panelists. We'll be introducing Tyler and Juan as they join later on. For today's housekeeping reminders, this call is being recorded for informational and community purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. During this meeting, we have it structured in a way that provides dialogue and engaged in first perspective, so we encourage both comments to be respectful and professional manner. We also ask our stakeholders to keep their comments brief and avoid repeating points that are already said to manage our time effectively, so we have everyone the opportunity to participate. You will have the opportunity to see the closed captioning on the bottom of your screen, as well as the transparency viewer that will allow you to see all the attendees log into today's call. Next slide, please. To ask a question, you will be connected. If you're connected to the audio of the computer WebEx, use the raise hand icon located in the middle of your screen. And then if you just dialed in through the phone line, you will be shown as call-in user. We will be those call-in users normally will have dialed in *3, and you'll be added to the question queue. As a reminder, we definitely encourage your full name manipulation before sending comment. And if once you're unmuted, just wait 1 second because it does unmute you a second after we went ahead and unmuted you. If you have a question, submit them via all panelists, and we will be able to see them. If we are able to respond to them, we'll definitely respond to them in the order that they're received. If you experience any technical issues, we also will be looking into those. My event producer, Stacy, she will be helping us on today's call as well. Next slide. As a reminder, we do have our paper presentation material posting process that we are currently working on and following throughout the ISO initiatives. Our working groups, we will try our best to make sure we get everything posted less than 2 days prior to meetings due to the short turnaround in discussions. And during the proposal development phase, we have about 1 week prior to stakeholder calls for papers and 2 days prior for presentations. They could vary between different initiatives, so we appreciate everyone's patience. I will be posting that presentation link on the chat momentarily, so you can see the most up-to-date slides that we just provided for the storage meeting. Next slide. We want to introduce the new stakeholder process initiative stakeholder timeline that shows the visual replacing the previous one. At this time, the storage design and modeling is working on, have posted discussion papers and issue papers. So we are currently scoping out the 4 topics of the storage design and modeling that we have been working across the board parallel. At this time, right now we define it between scope and development phase. So on this specific topic, we are definitely between scope and develop. Sergio will definitely dive in more on the next steps and also what exactly we are planning to publish later this month with our paper. So that would definitely work our way towards fully developed phase and then decide phase. And then if you have any more information, we do have a stakeholder process guide that has been published a few weeks ago by our true Allie Mays, and then with our senior advisor for stakeholder affairs. And then I think at this time we will cover the agenda, and I want to give Sergio the opportunity to help add any points for the agenda slide, number 6. So Sergio will be covering a few items today. In detail, I think, Sergio, would you like to cover them in detail? I think there's a lot of items we'll be covering, so I'll let you go ahead and give our stakeholders an overview of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Yeah, we'll get started with some of the feedback we received in comments earlier this month and how we are adapting the timeline to be responsive to that feedback. And then we'll go on to the three main topics for today: and update on nonlinearity relative to the outage management topic group, review of the current VCR paradigm, as was requested by stakeholders to have this more holistic discussion of the current elements of BCR and whether we should rethink or reimagine them for storage. And later, we'll do an overview of the conceptual energy storage resource model or biddable SOC model, again, by abiding to the request of some stakeholders to have a bit of a refresher on it as we move forward on those topics this year. Really, the goal is that for today's, we'll have some conversations that we've heard stakeholders want us to be able to address ahead of policy development so that we can hit the ground running this year. With that, I think I can keep going. Could you give me the presentation ability to just like move the slides on my own? That would be ideal. Okay, I see now I have it, so I'll keep going. And yeah, we have a bit of a packed agenda today, so I'll make sure to pause for questions, comments at different points of the sections. But again, as Brenda said, we really exhort you to keep your comments brief and minimize repetition as well, so that we can get through our agenda. So today we'll talk about nonlinearity, uplift redesign, and biddable SOC concepts, subset of the topics we have within this initiative. We really think that these are some of the foundational conversations for this year that stakeholders have asked us, and this is really taken a cue from a lot of the comments we received earlier this year and in prior rounds. So in comments that we received earlier this month, we saw a significant share of stakeholders agreed on the need for a holistic review of the current bid cost recovery paradigm. The idea being that we want to review elements of how bid cost recovery currently works so that we can discuss in a forum like this, and obviously through your comments, whether modifications or reimagining of those elements would be valuable for developing an uplift framework for storage from the ground up. In comments, we also saw that some stakeholders offered their perspectives on how to sequence some of the challenges we're seeking to address in this initiative. We saw big support for focusing on dev improvements and fallback ahead of some of the uplift discussion. So because of that, today we'll talk about fallback, and we'll do this holistic uplift framework review so that in our next meeting, we can really go all in on discussions around default energy bid enhancements, alternatives, since in comments, virtually all parties supported us moving on it fairly quickly. We also saw in the comments that some stakeholders asked for consideration of their reference level change requests as it relates to default energy bids. That's, again, another piece that we'll make sure to thread into the conversation in our February meeting focused on DEBs. Since today we want to make sure that we do and have all the conversation needed on the current pillars, or let's say tenets, of bid cost recovery. Unsurprisingly, I'd say we saw split views on the day-ahead bid cost recovery issue. In the paper, we noted that a share of stakeholders supported elimination or limiting day-ahead bid cost recovery, given the causes identified within that paper. but we also saw a significant share of stakeholders that prefer us to retain the Day-Ahead Cost Recovery at this time, asking for that holistic review that will get going today, and noting that future changes may warrant consideration of an uplift mechanism, particularly with the inclusion of the new DAME products. I think in this context, we definitely will want to, as I mentioned, have this holistic review of the current paradigm and get your perspective so as to further inform the policy development on this piece. And we're also working internally on better informing the potential interactions for discussions between DAME and BCR as well. We saw different stakeholders put forth transparency or analytical requests from having comment matrices in papers to better understand where different stakeholders position themselves across issues, to providing, for example, a refresher of the biddable state of charge model concept, which we'll do today, and also expanding the analysis that we've put forth, particularly regarding the impacts of multi-interval optimization, or more broadly, seemingly out-of-merit dispatch. Last year, we presented some analysis, DMM presented additional analysis, and we saw from that some stakeholders would like a bit of a deeper dive. That's something we also want to be able to, address this quarter as we move towards the full straw proposal, revised straw proposal, kind of turnaround with this topic. So we'll seek to provide this analysis in our meetings, as you'll see in our schedule in a couple of slides. And then finally, we offered in the paper, we included 3 different options that are by no means exhaustive, that have been, floated through the development of this initiative. We put forth those options to basically, be able to establish what the current thinking is within that paper, be able to provide some initial reactions on risks and feasibility, and get more feedback. I think in general, we saw 2 camps in the comments. One camp of stakeholders that strongly support option A, that would provide a targeted uplift. The stakeholders opposing this camp note that this option may not cover all drivers, and that it would be valuable to have this holistic review of current BCR postulates ahead of, let's say, favoring a given option. And that's what we intend to do today, as we've discussed in our prior meeting in December and seeing all the comments. And then the other camp, favors this holistic discussion first, and noted very importantly that other options could be considered beyond A, B, and C, which the ISO, we are in agreement. We want to keep discussing these elements and hearing your perspectives. And because of that, we want to have this kind of discussions as we'll hold today, so that it can inform either tweaks to existing options or just a different option altogether that we might, as a community, feel more aligned and comfortable with. So in light of all of this, this is the overview of the schedule for a little bit more than the first half of this year. And I'll tell you what we're trying to achieve here is we still have a paper that we had intended to release previously on mixed fuel and distribution level resources. We are intending on publishing that later this month. And the comments on that paper and on the meeting today will be due mid-February. And then within February, we'll have another posting relative to outage management. There we will memorialize the conversations and feedback we're getting on nonlinearity and the next steps there, and on other elements related to outage management. And we'll have a meeting in February focused on that paper, on default energy bids, and some of the analytical requests that stakeholders put forth in their comments. And then in March, we'll have a final meeting, an opportunity for feedback and discussion ahead of the period from late April to August, where we really intend to move forward with the process of moving from a straw proposal all the way to a draft final proposal. And as you see here, again, based a lot on the feedback we've heard, we are seeking to be able to put forth this document, this proposals later on in consideration of both the uplift and debt topics and the state of charge management topics, since we've seen a desire from stakeholders to make sure that what we do in this initiative may work in the current and future paradigm that storage resources may face. So this is the plan as of now. We will, of course, in your comments, will ask for feedback on this. We think that this aligns with the need of a bit of further discussion, more holistic discussions that some stakeholders have noted, as well as the need for moving forward with these topics in an orderly manner within this year. In a final note around schedules, that it would be good to hear from you all, whether today or in your written comments. You will notice that we've shortened the meeting from a full day meeting, which is what we've been doing almost for all of last year, with the exception of one, I believe, to a half day meeting. We did this, it's kind of twofold. First, because there may be other meetings later today that some stakeholders would like to attend, particularly around EDEM. But also because we've seen and heard about a bit of meeting fatigue, particularly with longer meetings. So it would be very valuable to hear from you all, if this changes amenable to you, to your schedules, so that we can think through the February and March meetings, and also the trade-off kind of between half a day virtual meeting versus full day in-person meeting. We also recognize the value of that. We recognize that maybe if it was a half a day meeting in person, it would be a bit too complex for some stakeholders. So we're trying to shake it up a bit at the beginning of this year to make sure we hit the ground running and that we're responsive to the requests on terms of timing and materials. And with that, I'll pause. I see there's one hand, so maybe we can go there, and please remember to state your full name and affiliation. Yeah.
Perfect. We do have Alva, and I believe Alva, go ahead and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
This is Alva Svoboda, PG&E. I had just a couple of comments or questions. One, on the data analysis that you've responded that you do plan to provide more data analysis. I wanted to suggest that one tendency of the data analysis so far, and it tends to extend across into other areas, but particularly in this one, is to sort of measure harm on a very average basis, and to essentially have the conclusions of the data analysis be that whether the amount of BCR, for example, has been small or essentially when you're looking at a question of whether there are losses to participants, I think it's important to have some presentation of data in terms of whether individual participants are in fact being more significantly harmed by particular policies or rules, not just because that focuses on that there is real harm pretty much happening, but it also indicates potential harms in the future, perhaps better than just looking at historical data on an average basis. So that's just one thought I have on the since I know you're embarking on that immediately, I wanted to suggest a little bit more granularity, how focused harms are in participants, whether they're focused in particular periods of the year, that sort of thing. The other question I had was in the schedule that you have, where would you be looking at a more full, essentially discussion and then potentially moving to a development on the foldback proposal from Rev Renewables? Because I think that would require, that's a topic on its own that should be called out here and perhaps put onto the agenda, because it is something that can perhaps be dealt with sooner than other things.
Yeah, totally. So let me first comment quickly on the first element. We hear you on that, Alva, and we heard from other stakeholders as well, kind of the importance of looking at those outlier resources, perhaps presenting some form of anonymized resource data to be able to see the impact for those resources. In terms of the foldback element, we'll start that discussion today, actually. That's our first topic. We'll talk about how we think a modeled solution for NGR would look like, how we think it could be incorporated within our current implementation timeline. And really the goal would be that between the conversation today, the paper later in Feb, and the conversation in February, we'll be able to basically have addressed the challenges or issues related to that potential model solution, get your feedback. So even though it doesn't explicitly say so here, that's really the goal. The meeting today is kind of the first one where we'll discuss that, how we think that model solution could look like, what are the parameters we need to integrate in master file, and we'll try to continue and wrap up that conversation ahead of our March meeting, right? So this one, February, comments, etc. Yeah.
So really, you're hoping for so this is the outage, you're putting this under the outage management topic, and the hope would be for a straw proposal prior to the March meeting. Great, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, Alva. I am not seeing other hands. I'll give it 10 seconds, something like that, see if there's any other comments. And if not, we'll get started actually with the nonlinearity topic, which I think is one of the most important ones for our group here. Okay, well, not seeing any others. Let me check the chat. Nothing there, so I'll keep going. And this is excellent because we're doing perfect on time. So wanted to talk about nonlinearity, provide an update, next steps, based a lot, on the feedback we've received from stakeholders. As a little bit of background for all of you that maybe have joined our meetings more sporadically, or the holidays maybe had made you forget a little bit of this. When we talk about foldback or nonlinearity, what we're really describing is the fact that lithium-ion battery energy storage systems see their Pmax and Pmin, they are really a function of state of charge. So what that means is that it is dependent on the state of charge of the asset, whether the the asset can achieve its Pmax or its Pmin. When the asset is almost full, it's quite difficult for the asset to be able to charge all the way to its Pmin. When the asset is almost empty, it cannot discharge all the way to its Pmax. So basically, those values taper off. In November of last year, 2 meetings ago, the ISO, we put a path forward that would first pursue a clarification that resources should only reflect the range unaffected by fallback within the ISO's master file, and 2, that would work on a modeled solution as part of a new storage participation pathway that would enable access to the fallback range. And that pathway is really what we'll also discuss later today, the biddable SOC or ESR pathway. Since that November meeting, we received a lot of feedback from stakeholders. Several stakeholders urged us to reconsider pursuing the clarification and instead rely on outage cards in the interim to manage the impacts of nonlinearity. And the stakeholders also advocated for pursuing a modeled solution, not as part of a future model, but really within the non-generator resource model as soon as possible, really calling for a fall 2026 implementation. In those comments and in the conversations we held since November, we saw that several stakeholders noted that REV Renewable's proposal could be a viable foundation for a model solution, and we were asked to assess its feasibility. In our meeting in December 4th, the last one of last year, we noted that we'd be working on determining the potential implementation path of a model solution for NGR and developing a bit more detail and clarity on how we think that would look, what it would entail, so that we can inform the conversation we'll have here and an upcoming updated paper on this matter. So since then, this is really the key part of the update, and then I'll go into the model solution itself. We really understand the position of stakeholders that there is value in pursuing a model solution for the NGR model so that we can reliably leverage that fallback range. We hear, from stakeholders, we heard this ask of, let's get this as part of NGR this year, fall of this year. I want to share with you all that, we believe, based on current and projected implementation work, a model solution that is based on master file data fields, basically including new fields, we believe it could be released as part of the spring 2027 release at the earliest. So, of course, there's a bit of a difference between fall of this year and spring of 2027, but I think in terms of getting us ready ahead of summer 2027, they're basically achieving the same thing in that regard. And this potential for implementation really is due to 2 elements that I do not think would be surprising to the majority of folks on the call. Well, first, of course, the ISO is incredibly focused on EDAM's launch later this year, and the release that we'll have later this year is exclusively focused on EDAM. And because of this as well, in moving forward, we'll be focusing more so on spring rather than fall for releases. So based on that, based on the fact that we believe, a model solution can be discussed here, completed here, and could be implemented at the earliest spring 2027. In light of that feedback and our ability to implement that model solution, we will hold off on the previously discussed clarification. So ahead of the release of the model solution, we want to make, we want to note that we maintain this position that under current policy, if fallback were to impede the fulfillment of RA obligations, be it generic RA or flex RA, should be generally subject to RAIM. We believe that, resources should be well aware that they are evaluated for RAIM based on their ability to offer their shown capacity for every applicable interval, and a standard that can be met with proper communication of unavailability through outage cards, for example, and that can also, leverage the use of master file parameters and economic bidding to manage state of charge and, as such, the exposure to entering these ranges. So with that, I'd like us to really focus the time we'll have today discussing nonlinearity and really focusing on the modeled solution. So what I'm showing here is a graphical representation of the feasible region or the possible solutions that the ISO markets see today. So if we take a look at this graph, the labels on the axis appear a little bit blurry, but I'll explain it. The x-axis is the state of charge of the resource. It goes from the origin of the graph, it would be the lowest possible state of charge, LSOC, to the far right of the x-axis, the maximum possible state of charge, or upper SOC, USOC. On the y-axis, we have the resource going from its Pmin all the way to its Pmax. And today, what we are assuming is that at any point of state of charge, the resource can perform at any point of that range from Pmin to Pmax. So what we call the feasible region is represented here in this orange rectangle. And basically it means that for the market, any point within that orange rectangle is believed to be a feasible dispatch instruction, right? We know, however, that the ability of the resource to reach its Pmax is dependent, or Pmin is dependent on state of charge. So the modeled solution, what it would effectively do is limit or cut some area of the feasible region. And you can see that here defined by this segment A, which is representing the impact of fallback on Pmax at the lower state of charge, and on line segment B in red, that is representing the impact of fallback on the Pmin at the higher levels of state of charge. We think that a solution like this is valuable, feasible, implementable, and also offers significant advantages over other ways of potentially representing fallback. And I'd like to address a couple of those. So in prior meetings, we had heard from stakeholders, also in comments, that if a linear approximation of the impacts of nonlinearity were too complex to implement, that the ISO may want to consider a step function, let's say, where instead of segments A and B being this linearized implementation, we'd have one or two steps that basically try and capture that drop in the Pmax and Pmin in a more simplified way, let's say. We did consider this alternative internally, and generally there are really a couple of reasons why we think a linearized approach like this is superior. First, it is generally easier to be able to include this constraint within our existing paradigm than a step function. It is easier to develop and to integrate with what we have. And second, it would yield, it is easier for the optimization as well to consume those constraints, since you have a continuous constraint here in the form of segments A and B, rather than a discontinuity coming from the step function. So a step approach, it wouldn't really be easier to do, and it wouldn't really be easier on the optimization for it to handle. So we believe that this linearized means would be more robust and overall easier to develop. As the title of this slide states as well, we pretty much believe that a model solution that can be achieved at the earliest spring of next year should be based on information within the master file. So this is really because of three reasons that we discussed it in our December meeting. The first one is that it minimizes the complexity of the implementation, right? The data would be in the master file, and it would be able to feed into our processes. Second, because it would really limit the potential for undue use and monitoring of its use, right? Having these values within the master file, as opposed to having them be, for example, subject to hourly changes through bidable parameters, would really minimize the potential for this to be used in a way that may circumvent or otherwise ignore the need for a derate or an outage being submitted, requiring obviously more monitoring efforts. And the final one is really that we are aware that nonlinearity is impacted by other conditions or situations, contexts that assets face. For example, voltage imbalance may exacerbate nonlinearity. So we also think that having this, within the master file would allow assets to be able to have generally a North Star on what level of impact and maintenance they need to consider for their assets, so that these values continue to be accurate and serve their purpose. So in that context, this model solution, what it will do, really it will cut that feasible region by the segments A and B. It'll make sure that the market will only award issue dispatch instructions that are within that feasible region. And this is all really trying to incorporate all of the prime values in the graph within the master file, right? So in the graph, you can see that we have LSOC prime is the moment where the blue line starts decreasing towards Pmax prime. Both of those values we'd want to be included and defined in the master file. The goal of it is really that we'll be able to get the nonlinearity breaking points, the USOC and LSOC prime values, and what I'm calling here the, let's say, diminished Pmax and Pmin, which very likely would be a non-zero but close to zero value as well, so that we are able to define all of this in the master file. And you can see the constraints that would be included here, that effectively what they're doing is ensuring that it's capturing what range or at what point of the x-axis the resource is, so as to determine what's the Pmax or Pmin maximum it can reach. I think in terms of further discussion and incorporation of this so that we can move forward with thinking about this in our paper and moving forward with implementing a solution like this, it would be very valuable to hear from you all on the pertinence of utilizing the master file. We definitely believe that that is kind of a key element of having this based on the master file is a key element for us to be able to have this model solution in a near time frame. I know that there were some perspectives, some stakeholders sharing that maybe it should be more dynamic. At this time, we believe that could significantly increase complexity and thus impacting the timeline of a solution. And we'd also like to hear from you all as well the potential, difficulty or not of be able to communicate these values to the ISO in the time frame associated with developing this solution so that we can integrate all of that in the master file. And here, I really have a slide that is really trying to summarize all this, and then I'll go to the hands. We recognize the value of a model solution for the NGR model. I think we've heard you, the stakeholder community, pretty clearly that this is an issue that merits attention for the current NGR model, not something that we can maybe consider in a future more robust reimagining of storage modeling. And with that, we think if this is based on master file data, we could release this at the earliest spring of next year. We will hold off on the clarification that we've discussed, and we'll include this model solution as well as the feedback we get from you all as part of an updated paper on these matters. And any issues related with RAIM, as well as changes to the RAIM framework, we will continue to discuss that within the RA program design initiative, which for this year, RAIM reform is one of its priorities. So I strongly urge stakeholders, thinking about RAIM, looking at RAIM and how to evolve that, to engage in that process. We've also seen from some stakeholders that some discussions of these issues maybe have focused or highlighted RA a bit prominently. So in light of that, we really want to be able to have those conversations in the right venues, the RA initiative, and focus the conversations here within storage design and modeling. Yeah, how we are designing this and how we're modeling it. So I'll pause here. I see two hands. Yeah.
Okay, Sergio, thank you. We have Alva first. Let's go ahead and take Alva from PG&E. Go ahead, Alva. Audio check.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Brenda.
We can hear
Can
you.
hear me? Great. This is Alva from PG&E again. I had sort of three, since you were providing formulas here, I felt it was okay to ask a little bit more weedy questions. First, would it be true that when a battery is in the current NGR model, when it's reaching close to suppose it's being used only for energy, so when it's close to reaching those limits, wouldn't the dispatch instructions be based on would those be limited by the fact that they have to be feasible within the dispatch process? And so, for example, that if the battery is going to be at 0 at the end of an interval, then you have to have an instruction that will allow it to go to 0 at the end of the interval rather than be dispatched. I'm just thinking that there's almost a a version of this is already going on in the last intervals of, of dispatch of batteries. I wanted to check on whether I'm correct in that, because that's the way I would see it. And if you're looking forward 15 minutes or 5 minutes, you're going to be constructing a dispatch that can be met over that interval. That's my first question.
Yeah, that's a good question, Alva. You are correct in the sense that currently the market is taking into account state of charge feasibility. But what we're trying to convey with this graph is really that it is still assuming, however, that it can reach or dispatch at Pmax, right? So,
Understood. Yeah.
So yes, it definitely takes into account the state of charge feasibility. It makes sure that, well, you cannot, discharge more than you could even store, but it is not taking into account that getting to those edges of LSOC prime or USOC prime immediately means effectively like a D-rate of the Pmax or Pmin it can reach, right? Yeah.
Right. Understood. But it just, I think there's an overlap here where you would actually be giving instructions that were at like half of the Pmax anyway in the last interval, just because you're going from having a certain amount of energy where you can actually discharge at Pmax, say, then at the end of the interval, you have to be at 0. Therefore, your average discharge is going to be half. And that's the instruction you would be giving anyway. So there's, in a sense, there's an overlap between these two things, which is, I'm not trying to, I favor this solution. I just think we want to have it could affect the degree to which the importance of this. So it's worth looking at. If, for example, these foldback regions were only affecting the last interval, then it would be unnecessary to do this, basically, because you wouldn't be able to give an instruction that would be at Pmax anyway. Question 2 is whether you would intend this model to have an effect on day-ahead dispatches. I would sort of hope not, and this is one of the reasons I kind of favor, from PG&E, not representing PG&E, representing myself, I sort of favored the idea that you had of, limiting the range, because in the day-ahead scheduling process, incorporating those foldback ranges could lead to a lot of approximations that wouldn't be very accurate. So I was just curious whether there's been any thinking about that. And then the last question I had was whether, or actually this is a more of a comment. I think that in order, from what I gathered from discussions with Rev Renewables, one of the implications of this would also be that you would have to enable derating of the values that are used in calculating the foldback range, so that the foldback range might be larger or smaller depending on the actual state of the battery, so that might affect RA, obviously, but I wanted to see if I was correct in assuming you'd need to have that in the model in order to properly implement this.
Yeah, so a couple of reactions here, Alva. On your first point, whether the market today is already issuing dispatch instructions that are not just full Pmin or Pmax based on the SOC feasibility. That can happen, and that's really kind of what we're trying to show here with this orange rectangle. Is basically today the solution can be a dispatch instruction can be issued along this whole area of the orange rectangle, but we know in reality that it should be kind of more limited by these diagonal segments.
Right.
Whether that would be impactful only in a handful of intervals or not, I think it also depends on the range of state of charge where the nonlinearity impacts the resource. Because at a lower, Pmax or Pmin, let's focus on the Pmax. at a decreasing Pmax, like shown in segment A, depending on just how much energy is still stored on the asset, that could last, a couple of intervals or more. So I'd say it's kind of dependent a bit on the characteristic of the asset, but this solution would allow us to make sure that the dispatch instruction is feasible as long as these breakpoints and the Pmax and the diminished Pmax and Pmin are accurate.
That's a good point.
And then on your point of
That's a good point.
And then on your point of at the end that nonlinearity or the characteristics that influence it, might change, and we need to make sure that that is accurately reflected. So we understand that tension. I think that's a bit where they can. That's a part of the argument of having the breakpoints and diminished values not be in the master file and perhaps be more easily updated. Overall, we think that that's a tension that first, would impact the lift relative to a model solution. And second, there are maintenance and operational decisions that impact those breakpoints in particular. And we believe that if this were integrated in the master file, resources would have a good incentive to maintain and operate their resource in a way that keeps that accurate. And they would still be able to update this, just not with the frequency, let's say, of a hourly biddable element, which, as I mentioned, and I can't stress enough, would make this much more complex to be implemented. It would definitely impact kind of this timeline of no sooner than spring of next year, which I think is very important for stakeholders. And then the final point I wanted to address with your comment was about the tension between day ahead and real time. So far we've thought about this modeling, I think, and its impact during our conversations with stakeholders in these meetings, much more focused on real time. In comments, we also saw from different stakeholders kind of the urgency of this in real time, much more so than in day ahead, for example. And I think part of your comment also kind of hinted at the idea of why PG&E or yourself saw value in the clarification. And I want to note, the fact that we would not pursue the clarification at this time does not impede, resources to reflect the range unaffected within the master file so as to ensure that they minimize their exposure to it. It just means that we will not pursue it at this time. So I'll say it like that. I know there's more hands, so I think we can keep going. Was there anything else there, Alba?
No. I just wanted to say thank you for your responses on this.
Thank you. Let's go with Renee.
Let's go ahead and unmute Renee Steichen. Revenues. Let's see. Stacy, if you can unmute her.
Yes, I think I'm unmuted now. Hi, Renee Steichen with Revenuables. Mostly just wanted to say thank you for hearing our proposal, and we think this is a great step towards addressing this issue, and we're thankful for CAISO pursuing this option instead of the clarification discussed a couple months ago. And we do look forward to working with you on this. And, while we think the master file integration will bring us much of the way there to resolve this foldback issue and not having infeasible dispatches. I think there are some adjustments that we'd like to discuss further. For example, if we have this as a percentage rather than a strict megawatt hour value, because then, as outages are more, as are updated more in the real time, then that will be reflected better rather than having it be in the master file, kind of a set one. Then it just gets a little clunky on resolving that issue. And then also if there's a way to be able to update this through the bidding and cyber in the real time. So, understanding there's a timing issue, and if the first step is doing this by spring 2027, we think that's a really great first step, and it'll get us a lot of the way there, but just seeing how all of this will kind of fit together in the longer term as well. So thanks.
Thank you, Renee. I really appreciate your comments. I'd say on the first part of the percentage piece, definitely very interesting. We'll think about that as well. On the second part, I like how you mentioned, maybe this is a first step that gets us most of the way there, and then we can assess too if other tweaks or modifications may be needed. And as you will all see later today, we have been thinking about this as one part of a new storage model now, and we'll talk about later how other parts would also probably fit into this in a different paradigm. But we agree that we see this as valuable for NGR and a future model both, and it's very likely that something like this will get us most of the way there, that outages and real-time communications are less needed for us to achieve feasible dispatch instructions. So thank you. I see Don has his hand up, so let's go ahead and go with him.
Storage Alliance. I completely concur with Renee's comments, and so
Sorry,
we're
Don.
thankful.
Could you introduce yourself again? I think it cut as you were doing it.
Don Trethewey from the California Energy Storage Alliance. I completely agree with Renee's comments, and we're thankful that we're actually moving to being able to review actual proposals that CAISO is looking to implement. And I would note on the on the previous slide, potentially not all of these. You may not need to update all of these parameters in real time, and so I think that when we think through the design and evaluate how it's coming together, I just think we should keep that in mind. That's another way to decrease the complexity and hit that spring 2027 implementation. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, well, that's something we can also incorporate in our discussions on the paper too, so as to get feedback and make sure we can wrap this up quicker and be addressing all of the concerns stakeholders have shared on it. I see Callie raise her hand.
And actually,
again.
can I make one other comment?
Yep.
I'm really happy to see that we're actually talking about RA related issues in the resource adequacy initiative versus mingling those issues with coming up with the correct market design. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully that makes these discussions more focused and dynamic in both initiatives, right? And we have the correct set of stakeholders and parties in each of the rooms. So appreciate that, Don. Let's go with Callie. Yeah.
I think I know the answer to this question.
Can you introduce yourself? And you're very low. Let's check your microphone.
Is this better?
No. Try again.
Let's see.
Sergio, can you hear her?
I can enough to answer Callie's question. So if you want to go ahead, Callie. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think I know the answer to this question. I just wanted to confirm. Can you go back to the slide with your chart? Yes, this one. Okay, so if a resource submits an outage card that derates its PMAX, and let's say it derates it down below what's defined as the PMAX prime, I'm assuming the market isn't actually going to see that blue A line as increasing at that lower level of state of charge, and that the market will actually still limit it to its actual derated PMAX.
Yeah, well, that's the goal, really, that we would. This is all assuming no outage is submitted. Outages would take precedence over what is the feasible solution space here. So it would further move either the blue segments or the red segments. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure if this was, you know, the A1 and A2 and B1 and B2, if they're being calculated in the optimization and they're using a derated PMAX value, just want to make sure that there's maybe some rule in there. I think it would make sense, obviously, to not have it end up with a dispatch above the derated PMAX, because I think you could end up with the line actually like your A, instead of going increasing, it would actually decrease down to the derated PMAX, which, I mean, I'm not a storage operator, but I don't think that would make sense. But if others think otherwise, obviously feel free to chime in and correct me.
Yeah, we can add to the conversation as well, both in the paper and our meeting on it, kind of the interaction of this with outages. But generally, you know, an outage to the PMAX or the PMIN will basically take this flat sections, lower it relative to the y-axis, and any outage relative to the LSSOC or USOC would shorten those diagonal segments, right, within the x-axis. The goal being that, you know, we're basically respecting both, and that if the PMAX were to have an outage all the way down very close to the P prime, you would still have that small diagonal, because PMAX prime, we're thinking about PMAX and PMIN prime as numbers that are pretty close to zero, right? Because that way we can still have a feasible solution while respecting the fact that effectively, when you're really near those limits, the asset can no longer withdraw or inject. So you wouldn't expect to have an inversion of those diagonal segments. Maybe here the y-axis, because we see the separation between PMAX prime and PMIN prime, it kind of plays a mental a trick, thinking that there might be a big gap there, but that's the goal. We can explain that in more detail. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the scenario where PMAX is derated below PMAX prime, but if you can include that example in the next iteration, how that would work, that would be great.
Very much. Yeah. Thank you for that comment. I think we can think about how to visualize this better. And I just saw a message too from another stakeholder of maybe we might want to think about the values in the y-axis as percentages of PMAX or of the OMS tickets as well. That was a comment from Rev.
So I defer to them in terms of their expertise of operating storage resources. That just occurred to me from the mathematical formulation that I don't. Yeah, but that sounds great. If next iteration, if we can kind of walk through those examples again with PMAX is derated below PMAX prime. Yeah. Thanks.
Very well. And that was Callie Wells representing WPTF, if the recording didn't catch that, because it's kind of faint, but I think
I will try and fix my audio next time I chime in. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Callie. I am not seeing other hands currently. I'll give it a couple seconds more. I think, we are appreciative of the engagement of folks on this topic. And, we think that the way we're moving forward will probably give us the majority of the benefit related to kind of accessing that fallback range. So not seeing other hands, I'll move on to the next topic because I do expect that in the next one we might want to have a significant back and forth. This next item is all about the review of the current BCR paradigm. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the stakeholder call, really the goal of this section is to be able to respond to the ask from stakeholders to kind of go over the current postulates, the current assumptions around the bid cost recovery paradigm we have today, and discuss amongst ourselves whether some of these may merit re-examination or reimagining as we think about an uplift paradigm specific to storage resources moving forward. We heard from some stakeholders in our in our December meeting and in the comments that a conversation like this would be really useful to kind of further refine the different options people have put forth and also to imagine new options potentially. So the way that this section is arranged, we'll talk about BCR today, highlight 3 or 4 of its key postulates, and then at the end, I've included some questions for discussion. So I only have about 7 slides here. I think the best way to go through these will be to just present what BCR currently is. Feel free to raise your hand for clarifying questions, please, during that first bit. And then once I get to the discussion questions, feel free to raise your hand to chime in on all your thoughts and hypotheses or ideas to share with the group. Would be good if we can first just focus on clarifying questions, because that'll make sure that we all have the same understanding of BCR today, and then we can go into the fun part of doing some brainstorming altogether here. Okay, so you've heard this several times by now, but when bid cost recovery was first designed, it was really designed with conventional thermal assets in mind. BCR is the process by which the ISO ensures that scheduling coordinators can recover a series of costs that their assets may face or incur prior to the intervals when they were expected to generate electricity. So for example, for conventional thermal plants, it is likely that these resources may incur fuel costs or startup costs ahead of the periods in where they had a schedule for injecting power. So with BCR, we make sure that these resources can recover those costs over the trading day if the revenues associated with that trading day were insufficient to cover those costs. The key costs that BCR is focused on are enlisted here: startup costs, minimum load costs, transition costs that apply to multi-stage generator resources, energy bid costs, and ancillary service bid costs. We'll have some of these questions later in the section that is trying to foment some discussion here. But overall, I think, as you can tell, it's really just a subset of these costs enlisted here that are the most material or impactful for storage. Others are more so focused on the costs that thermal assets experience, and that's really part of the it's really part of the historic development of BCR. And before I go further, my apologies, I also want to note that I'm joined now by my colleague Tyler He works in our settlements team. He's very well versed in matters regarding storage, so he'll be joining this part of the presentation in case you all have questions or thoughts that maybe Tyler can assist us with. So thank you for joining, Tyler. Okay, so let's keep going. When we think about bid cost recovery, we talk about this concept of the commitment period, and that was already kind of included or referred to in the prior slide when we're really thinking about that period relative to when the asset is expected to, it has an award, for example. So a commitment period is defined as consecutive time periods within the trading day where the resource is online, synchronized, and available for dispatch. When we think about commitment periods, we generally, we divide them in two. It's either the self-commitment period or the CAISO commitment period. The self-commitment period is a bit self-explanatory by its name. It really refers to the share or portion of the commitment period where a resource submitted self-schedules for energy or is self-providing ancillary services. During the self-commitment period, these resources are not eligible for BCR of startup costs or transition costs, but they are eligible for BCR for awarded energy and ancillary services. The CAISO commitment period is kind of defined as the remainder of the commitment period. The commitment period share that is not a self-commitment period. And during the CAISO commitment period, resources are eligible for BCR for all of the costs that we've discussed so far. I think that this element of us thinking about the commitment period and separating it out between self-commitment and the CAISO commitment period is quite material for thermal resources, for example, given the ineligibility of recovering certain costs. But it does seem like in the case of storage and the fact that awarded energy and AS costs, bid costs, are probably the most significant costs to consider, this differentiation may play a different role, right, than for a conventional resource where we're really making some of this cost ineligible. I also wanted to note, before we move away from the language of a self-commitment period versus the CAISO commitment period, that there are some exceptions, there are some exclusions from the BCR paradigm today that are applicable to storage resources that would basically mean that those periods are not considered either in the self-commitment or the CAISO commitment period. And there I'm thinking mainly of, for example, periods where the ASSOC, the ancillary service state of charge constraint, is binding and results in an asset having to be dispatched in a given way to be able to meet AS awards and schedules. So that is kind of an asterisk, a special circumstance for storage, where through our filing and FERC has found it is just unreasonable for exclusion of those periods or those intervals from consideration within the BCR framework. So everything that we're discussing here is really around the general applicability of BCR, the general tenets, pillars, assumptions of BCR, but there are exceptions or differences that apply for some resources in some circumstances. So just wanted to underscore that. Okay, I think this part of how bid cost recovery is calculated and netted is one that we've heard from stakeholders a particular interest in kind of reassessing or reimagining. Today, we perform separate pre-calculations for the day ahead, here the integrated forward market, but more colloquially the day ahead market, and for the RUC, the residual unit commitment process, and the real-time market. So there's different netting pre-calculations. If the difference between total costs seen as, the total bid cost of all accepted bids and the market revenue is positive, we think of that as a shortfall. If the difference is negative, we think of that as a surplus, right? For each resource, we basically take all of the shortfalls and surpluses of all hours for a given trading day, and we netted them separately. There's one day ahead or IFM netting, and then there's one netting for RUC and real time. So all of the IFM surpluses over the entire day are used to offset all of the IFM shortfalls. If we end up seeing that difference is positive, as I mentioned before, then we think that might merit they receive a VCR uplift payment equal to that positive shortfall. If the total there is negative, there's no action needed. I want to be very clear too, again, in this slide, we are talking about how VCR works generally, like for all resources. But in the context of storage in particular, RUC is immaterial, right? Because today, storage is not participating in RUC. So really, we're really thinking about an IFM netting and then a real-time market RTM netting. Today, RUC is not material for storage resources. But we want to underscore that this separate netting has been something that stakeholders have wondered whether it makes sense or whether it is reasonable for storage resources. In particular, because it kind of ties or preassumes some form of optimality in the solution in IFM relative to what we may see and want in real time. So I see there's a hand. Let me pause there, go to Don if there's a clarifying question, and then we'll enter into the discussion questions where I think it will be great to hear some of the perspectives of stakeholders. Can we unmute Don? Yeah.
Hi, Don Trethewey from CISA. I just wanted to make a comment on RUC. I don't think we want to just offhand disregard it, because as part of the day-ahead market enhancements, storage can provide reliability capacity up and down and will be participating in RUC. Now, I just think we should think about it in terms of DAME, not in terms of what's currently implemented when thinking about this. That doesn't mean that I think that there's going to be the need for some huge RUC bid cost recovery payment or anything like that, or make whole payment. It's just, I just want to be clear that storage is going to be in RUC as part of DAME.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Don. I completely agree. I just wanted to, that's really why I wanted to share in this slide in a written way, kind of what is the rule for all resources, but also not the instance of how today it works. But you're right that this is something to consider moving forward. And I think in the context of, netting separately, it also maybe raises a bit of a question of, in the future with DAME, what do we think are a lot of this discussion around BCR for storage or uplift for storage, I think, ultimately boils down to we want resources to be able to bid and participate in a way that provides the greatest value and that anticipates market needs and that is able to, satisfy grid needs efficiently. But there seems to be a bit of a tension between wanting to deliver your day-ahead schedule and meet that, or wanting to anticipate and meet real-time needs. So I want to introduce that because I think with DAME in the future, but also with the particularities of storage, I think that tension kind of results in maybe we should rethink whether that separate netting might be necessary or not. So maybe I'm getting ahead with the discussion question, so I'll just go to that slide, since I'm also not seeing other clarifying question hands. So I put together here 2 slides, some questions to foment some conversation here. I'll quickly kind of share them, and then I'll really just open the floor to get the perspectives of folks on the call, and we'll have plenty of time to discuss this today. So I guess the first question is, what are the most material costs currently thought of in the bid cost recovery paradigm for storage resources? What are the ones that are the most important or impactful, the ones enlisted here? If others that are not here, it would be good to hear from you all too. Second question would be, given which costs are material, are the current definitions of the commitment periods useful for a future storage uplift paradigm? Should we kind of keep thinking about storage uplift in those terms? Is it meaningful, or should we kind of pivot or transition away from that? And I think this slide might be the more provocative one for conversation. Is this current practice of netting IFM separately from ROC and RTM reasonable for storage? Should this be a feature of a future paradigm or not? How does this also kind of relate to incremental settlement? So today, when we do the settlement of a resource, we're really looking in real time at settling the difference relative to the day ahead. But storage resources, they're kind of uniquely positioned in the sense that they can be very responsive and they're very well primed to be able to quickly respond to created conditions. So does incremental settlement kind of assume that they had, quote unquote, got it right? That is how the asset should perform. Would moving away from those practices and those separate nettings maybe be better at recognizing that storage, can be leveraged to meet grid needs in varying contexts. So I wanted to offer these questions for discussion. I really, really hope this is responsive to the ask of a review of the current elements of BCR. And I'd love to hear, the perspectives of stakeholders here, particularly those that have asked for a more robust discussion of the key tenets of BCR today. I'm not seeing any hands, so maybe while people put their hands up, I'll see if Tyler, you have anything to add? Did I mess something up? Please feel free to correct me. And if you have anything to chime in, we welcome that. And while people are putting their hands up, yeah.
No, thank you, Sergio. That was great.
Okay, thank you. I see Balu raised his hand. If you can unmute them, and please make sure to share your name and affiliation.
From SCE. Yeah, can you hear me? Or
I can hear you now.
okay, yeah, Balu Shastri from SCE. So one thought, I'm not sure again how this would be operationalized, but typically with your gas, hydro, other dispatchables, when you bid in day ahead and you bid in real time, almost without much, you don't have to do a whole lot, and you're typically better off because you get inked if the price is above your bid, and you get decked if your price is below your bid. But with batteries, sometimes due to the vagaries of charge and discharge, etc., sometimes we see that, oh wow, this was the outcome after all the settlements. We would have just been better off self-scheduling charge and discharge. So I don't know, is there a way for a BCR framework to somehow have a make whole wherein you're never worse off than simply charging and discharging? Again, it's just a thought that came to mind. I'm not, how you would do this obviously needs a lot more thought, but because with batteries, it's just not as automatic that when you rebid in real, I mean, we want to rebid in real time, and that we do, we want to offer flexibility, but there are circumstances where you seem to not get as good a result. So now, does that warrant BCR? I'm not sure, but it's something that came to mind.
So let me try to restate what you mentioned about. See if you agree with this restatement. If we can keep him unmuted, that would be great. So what I'm hearing is it would be valuable to think of a paradigm where rather than storage being made whole to the sum of its accepted bids in each market, that storage would maybe be made whole to the outcome of a given market. So basically, for example, I'm trying to kind of restate what I've heard, and what I'm hearing is rather than we're going to make you whole to the sum of your accepted bids in IFM, and then we'll do the same in real time, it's we're going to have both the markets occur, day ahead, real time, and then ex post, we're going to make sure that if in real time you were, quote, worse off than in day ahead, you're made whole to that. But if you're better in real time, that's fine because you kind of like reacted to the conditions in the market, etc. Is that kind of what we were trying to share, though?
Yeah, basically. So that way there is incentive to provide flexibility. Now, I don't know, I haven't thought through, is this going to introduce other mal incentives? I haven't quite thought through that, but yeah, I think you summarized it pretty well. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective. And I think it's interesting because I think a tension that we've been trying to think through, and it's very evident in the long and detailed paper we put out. The key tension is we want all resources to meet their schedules in general, their day-ahead schedules. But we also want resources to be very responsive to real-time conditions. And I think this might kind of consider that, but I agree that maybe a bit more thinking is needed, and that's why these meetings are for. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Don's hand is up.
Don Trethewey from CISA. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to show my age with this comment. CAISO actually used to net all day ahead and real-time BCR for all resources and stopped doing that in May 2014 for the reasons that Blue was sort of highlighting, is that if you net them together, then you basically create a disincentive to actually be willing to be re-optimized in real time if that's going to end up making your overall, in essence, you're going to take your profit from day ahead and use it to cover shortfalls that occur in real time. And so it was it was separated for resources for the exact reason that in day ahead, you take your profits that are optimal for that day, and then you can rebid and participate in the real-time market. And if the real-time market causes an issue with you, then there's a make whole payment in real time. And so I think you still want that same philosophy should apply to storage too. That you don't want storage simply you don't want people. I think you made a comment like, well, we want people to meet their day ahead schedules. No, you don't want people to meet your day ahead schedules. You want people to meet the real time dispatch given based upon update the economic bids and the cost of the resources based on real time conditions. That's what you want them to follow. We don't want everybody self scheduling into real time. Otherwise, we want to have the full fleet available to us to manage changes. And so I think storage is different in that, I think we've looked at like the forced buyback and the forced sell back type stuff that introduces some anomalies that wouldn't be applicable to a conventional resource. But to me, the philosophy is the same, is that we want to incentivize real-time participation, and you do that by not netting profits in the day ahead against losses in real time.
Let me ask you a question, Don, if I can. I definitely follow this idea of why we wouldn't just net everything all together. I guess my question of what I heard from Balu, and maybe I added more to it, but is there is some value though, perhaps, in thinking about, rather than netting everything across, just thinking about what are we making the resource whole to? Like today we're making resources whole to the sum of their accepted bid costs, right? In each market. And that creates that tension that I was trying to refer to of, well, on one side, we want people to be able to meet their schedules, but on the other side, we also want people to be able to be flexible and responsive and to anticipate conditions and bid in a way that anticipates or reflects upcoming conditions of the market. So I guess part of my question here is, maybe it's not just about the netting, but it's about what are we making people whole to? If an asset, a storage resource, would be able to make sure that they'd be able to let's say guarantee, for lack of a better word, like their day ahead revenue outcomes, then the incentive in real time would be to be responsive, and you'd be able to pivot away from that. And if you make, you actually have higher revenues because you contributed to reliability, in key moments, we're fine. But if there was some difference, maybe we could consider bringing you up to that day ahead expectation, let's say. Because I think that is a bit different than the philosophy we have today. Like here, we have a philosophy that's just based on, it's just based on accepted costs in any given market. It's not really looking at the interdependency between those markets. And for storage, that seems very critical. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear your perspective.
Well,
thanks for the
I think we've already gone down the path of looking at what happened in the day ahead market in terms of determining the appropriate make whole payments. Isn't that the change that we put in on the forced buybacks, that a forced buyback can't be profitable. So we were trying to address that there. So that's why I've said in this, we need to look at it holistically, because even though you may not need BCR on the day ahead time frame, there may be information associated with day ahead that informs what the appropriate thing to do is in real time. So I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that either. And I'm not trying to explore this from the perspective of, well, we get rid of day ahead, and then what do we do? It's really more, I agree with you from this holistic perspective. Let's take a step back and think whether this current assumptions would hold on a future of storage uplift paradigm. So I think I totally agree with that with you. Yeah. Okay, I am not seeing other hands here. I think we definitely heard significant interest in rethinking, revisiting this core assumptions of BCR ahead of working or developing more of a straw proposal on a future uplift paradigm. And I see a new hand from Clinton. Let's unmute them. Yeah.
Can we unmute Clinton? Hi. Thank you. Introduce yourself, Clinton, if you can.
Clinton Tai, SoCal Edison. I think kind of weighing in on this previous point here, Sergio, what I'm hearing is there is some consideration about netting BCR across day ahead in real time. And that's one point. The other point I'm hearing is we want the batteries to be able to react to real-time conditions. It seems like if we provide the incentive to, hey, if you can outperform day ahead, levers are there for kind of these batteries to have a hedge, and they have the agency to represent bids one way or another, and it's only upside for the real time. I have a bit of concern there, so I think my point here is more so, where can we, if there is a reliability issue on the grid, where does it fall in CAISO to use it exceptional dispatches in real time? It seems like that could be the driver for BCR, and that mechanism is already in place. And it seems like if scheduling coordinators want to preserve the day ahead awards, you take out the agency to gamify BCR in the real-time markets if any deviation from day ahead is driven by an exceptional dispatch. So I just kind of want to float that idea out there.
Okay, thank you for that, Clinton. I have a couple of reactions. So the first one is, I kind of share, and I'll try to repeat in a different way, a little bit what Don and I were trying to say before. I think in general, there is this tension between being able to meet the day-ahead schedule, but also being able to operate in a way in real time that actually considers the needs of the grid. So that latter part is more so kind of determined or driven by the bids, the behavior of the resource in real time. Are they taking into account expected conditions? Do they have a sophisticated kind of bidding approach that allows them to, as you said, kind of outperform the day-ahead results, if possible? Now, we do have, and will continue to have, the ability to issue exceptional dispatch instructions. And we already have means to make sure that if exceptional dispatch occurred, resources are receive an uplift payment for it. I think part of the conversation here a little bit is, how do we align the incentive to potentially, to pay attention to real-time conditions, to bid in that, considering them, to potentially, as you said, outperform the day-ahead result? How do we align that with also the need or these resources might have to assess that trade-off between, do I just stick to a day-ahead result, that would assume that day-ahead, quote-unquote, got it right, no? Because it would basically, today, we are basically telling resources, your day-ahead output, your day-ahead results determine what you, in general, should be doing. Any deviation from that is settled incrementally, no? Is that kind of reasonable when we have a resource like storage that is so time dependent, that is so intertemporally dependent, and that can very quickly respond to grid needs and potentially outperform in real time? So I think that's part of the tension. Does this address your comment too, Clinton? Do you have any other thoughts?
I think we're on the same page. What I'm going to suggest is the incentives in the real-time market already exist. As you know, the price will move. I think if you want to increase kind of the responsiveness of batteries to the real-time conditions, we might need to reconsider the time deadline in which you can revise your bits. I think sometimes that is too constraining for a, we'll say, informed scheduling coordinator to even be able to react appropriately to real-time conditions because of that constraint. I think secondarily, something that's kind of been floated in these sessions is a SOC-based kind of bidding. I think if you were able to somewhat quantify your opportunity costs as a function, and not on the CAISO side, but if a informed scheduling coordinator could somewhat represent that, then again, they have more of a means to capitalize and be more of a active real-time participant. So I think that's kind of, we're on the same page, but just maybe more things to discuss.
Yeah, thank you, because that is a great almost advertisement to the section we have after this one, where we'll talk about how a biddable SOC or ESR concept would greatly kind of mitigate that challenge of the time difference between the bid submission timeline and the operating hours. So I think that's a very valuable point that can help us think it through, not only now, but also moving forward. I guess a point that I wanted to maybe push a bit more to see if there's any thoughts or reactions here has to do with the incremental settlement, right? So I'll say it verbally, but I'll actually try and revise this slide and repost so that we have one slide that talks about this for the benefit of people preparing their comments and thinking this through. So basically today, we are, settling day ahead as the product of output times the LMP in that given hour. And then when we get to real time, we're really settling as the difference in megawatts relative to the day ahead results times the real time LMP. So we do that for all resources. And I think for conventional resources, for the majority of resources, that's what I'm referring to when I say, in general, there's this notion of, we want resources to abide by their day ahead. We then settle incrementally from that. And that way we're able to capture the possibility of resources deviating for better or worse and capturing some more value or not providing some of the expected value to the grid. So I think this is kind of an important premise of VCR, because today, the way that we're doing VCR particularly in real time, is really just looking at whether the sum of all of that delta, all of that incremental settlement is greater or not than the sum of the costs there. I think this makes it challenging for us to create those incentives too of potentially overperforming in real time, like beating your day ahead in real time by being on top of the trend and bidding accordingly. So it is perhaps important or worthwhile for us to think a bit about, is that a reasonable paradigm when we know that there might be material differences in the conditions assumed in day ahead and real time, particularly for an asset that is state of charge limited, like storage. I think I still see Clinton's hand. Maybe that's an old hand, but now I also see a new hand from Don. Okay, I think we only have Don. If we can unmute him.
Don Trethway from CISA. I would just note that the day-ahead market can never get it right, even if system conditions were perfect between day-ahead and real time, because the day-ahead market is hourly granularity, and net load does not move in hourly blocks. So again, it's back to why you want to incentivize as much dispatchable resources as possible in real time, and which is why the decision was made all the way back in 2014 to separate these for that exact reason.
Yeah, I don't think I'm contesting that or kind of mentioning or trying to hint at it being unnecessary. I think I'm more so trying to note, today, the way that we are doing incremental settlement and that we're thinking of DCR kind of assumes that day ahead got it right. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say that day ahead will get it right. I'm saying the way that we do incremental settlement and how we are thinking DCR today seems to imply that day ahead got it right. Or maybe for a storage resource moving forward, we should kind of do away with that pre-assumption and instead focus on, how do we make sure that resources do or provide the value resulting from day ahead or more, Like, how do we ensure that they can do at least what we thought of in day ahead or more? That's kind of where I'm trying to go with this brainstorming discussion on. I think, for example, I've in prior meetings too, we've heard this notion of we might want to just overly focus on a specific set of drivers, and that might be useful, but I think it still preserves this assumption that I'm trying to hint at. Yeah. Okay. I see Alva raised his hand. Let's go with Alva.
Yeah, this is Alva at PG&E. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm trying to understand how this relates to the previous discussions about. So basically, the BCR needs in real time currently are driven by state of charge being taken to a point where you can't satisfy a day ahead award. Or the other scenario that's been presented is the one where you are mitigated and then are unable to satisfy and then scheduled and then unable to satisfy an award later. And the comments by the DMM have been that resources should be exposed to the real-time prices. But the problem is that batteries are unable to control their state of charge in order to be certain not to be exposed to harmful effects of the real-time prices. How are you seeing this? I'm just not really getting how this concept fits into that whole discussion. Maybe you could just explain that.
Yeah, I'd say, no, well, in two ways. The first one is a lot of the conversation we've had so far has been examining bit cost recovery for storage resources today from the lens of what are the drivers of bit cost recovery? You know, what are the situations that lead to payments for these assets? I think what we've heard from stakeholders in the most recent round of comments on the last meeting was, this is good but insufficient. We also need to talk about what are the assumptions of bit cost recovery today and whether we need to rethink them for a storage-specific paradigm. I think the conversation here is really trying to get to that latter point of what are the assumptions, do we need to rethink them? And I think one big assumption that we have is that by means of doing the separation of the netting and by means of doing this incremental settlement, we're working in a world where we are assuming that day ahead, quote unquote, got it right, and any change on top of that in real time is just, you know, incremental to it. It's just either you provided a little bit more, a little bit less, we're going to settle around that, and we know kind of what, from day ahead, kind of what should have been the performance or outcome of this resource. What I'm trying to share here to address this request of let's go deeper into the assumptions of BCR, see if we need to rethink them, is that assumption even reasonable for storage? Which I don't think it might be, right? I think for storage, just by virtue of the fact that we know that conditions will be different from day ahead to real time, that the state of charge of resources might be different from what they thought of when they submitted their bids in day ahead for the day ahead market and what materializes in real time. Because of all of those sources of difference, it might be that this kind of approach of settlement and of thinking BCR may merit a bit of a deeper rethink, let's say. That's really how it fits and how I think it connects with the conversations we've had so far, that one of the key critiques of the stakeholders that have urged us to kind of slow down on this is you're only focusing on drivers, but not on the assumptions around BCR today. Does that help, Pablo? Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm not sure whether this involves speeding up or slowing down, but I mean, so we know that if you have a day-ahead schedule and you can adhere to it, so if you can manage your state of charge to, so that the question of whether you're going to be unable to get to your initial state of charge is an open one, but let's assume that you can satisfy your day-ahead awards, you're not going to, in general, be needing bit cost recovery. You're going to have an economic solution relative to your bids. So in that sense, the day-ahead solution has to get it right. And then the issue in real time of incremental settlement is whether you're able to only adjust in ways that don't affect that that day-ahead settlement.
So I guess that's I think you just hit a part where my question arises, no? Because you just mentioned if you are able to meet your day ahead, then we're fine. But doesn't that presume within it that the result of the day ahead for that storage resource, what we thought they should do, is what brings the most value?
No, it's just that it within, well, I mean, it's within the market solution. It was the best use of that resource in the day ahead market.
In the day ahead, yeah.
Yeah, and so that and at the highest level, having all of the resources. I mean, that's kind of an assumption of the day-ahead market, is that you're planning correctly for the overall use of resources. And then, resources offer incremental flexibility or cell flexibility based on their capabilities, so CAISO can adjust from the day-ahead solution. I'm sorry if I'm missing the basic point that you're making there, but it seems to me like you should assume that if your day-ahead solution is consistent with your bids, that's going to be the best you could have done in the day-ahead market. And in real time, you should only be adjusting as you're able to adjust. And what you'd like is to be able to adjust consistent with your incremental willingness, rather than being driven to points that force you to lose the revenues that you got in the day-ahead market.
Yeah, no, I follow your point, Al. I think I don't mean to say that in day ahead, the day ahead solution is definitely the best solution in the day ahead timeframe, right? Like we know it's a cost minimizing solution for the whole system based on the information we have then. That is what the assets should do to minimize the cost of serving load, et cetera. I think when we then move to real time, this is where we've been having this kind of conversation on the edge for the last year or so of, we want assets to be able to meet their day ahead schedule to some degree, like that's part of our goal. But then we also have this other goal of, we want assets to be able to be exposed to real-time conditions, to be reactive to real-time conditions, to be able to get ahead of them and bid consistently with them. And there might be situations, instances, where being responsive and bidding consistently with the real-time conditions yields a very different result than what we thought was the result in day ahead. That's kind of the tension I'm trying to highlight here. Of, in that context, if the assets actually, if the asset is actually responsive to the real-time needs, and it yields a different result, but they bid, it was economic, the market optimization yield that, what should be what the resources, let's say, made whole to, or that it's recovery philosophy there.
Well, it's sort of an argument for the original idea that resources shouldn't, and going to Don's point from a while back, resources shouldn't be exposed to those losses from the day-ahead schedule if it's due to, let's put it more broadly in your terms, if it's due to an improvement in the overall solution in real time, they should be able to recover those losses. I mean, that's an argument really for that point of view of it, rather than the point of view that we need you to be exposed to those losses so that you'll, feel the whip and be able to bid appropriately, given your actual level of risk. The other point is that CAISO is supposed to be valuing that flexibility correctly now in the DAME design, and paying for that very product of the ability of resources to adjust. And ideally, and I don't think they've got it right yet, but they should be paying for the flexibility of batteries in the right way in advance, ideally, so that they can ensure themselves that they have that ability. And then maybe you cover those potential losses of batteries due to CAISO doing things with them that lead them to be unable to satisfy those schedules. This is brainstorming, so I'm just talking off the top of my head.
This is the whole goal of this this session. You know, we wanted to make sure that we can have this discussion since several stakeholders have asked us to think about the assumptions and elements of BCR today with a fresh set of eyes. So I appreciate that, Aldo. Okay, I see another hand from Balu, and I will encourage other stakeholders in the call, if you want to chime in on this, please raise your hand after this kind of a round of hands. I think we'll move on to our next topic. Yeah.
Stacy, can you unmute Balu? And Balu, keep your hand raised. Don't lower it. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so Balu from SCE, one idea I guess that I'm just thinking is, so we want to preserve our day ahead to the extent possible, and we're trying to do that. One of the things that does throw a little monkey wrench into that is charging before upward AS or discharging before downward AS. Now we know that that has to be done to some extent to preserve, to make sure that the AS is viable. But I'm just thinking that losses related to that, I mean, should that be BCR eligible? It's just something that I'm throwing out there, because if you didn't have AS, then you can bid in a way as to largely preserve your day ahead, and at least you're not worse off, and you'll only deviate from day ahead if the price really spikes, so you discharge there, or price really tanks, and then you charge there, I guess. But this forced charging and discharging prior to AS, I'm just wondering, is there some, because like, for example, in day ahead market for spinning reserve, it's a very low attenuation factor that's assumed, but then now you come to real time, and I think they want like 30 minutes of that potential take of spin to be available. So you can try to estimate, okay, well, I think they're going to call on this much, so let's try to bake that into our AS bids. But would it be a little easier if that forced, if you're basically forced to discharge or charge at an uneconomic rate due to this AS constraint? I don't know, should that maybe be considered for BCR? And then that way, you're still trying to follow day ahead, but you don't have to worry as much about, oh, if they do this and do that to call on AS, then am I going to lose money, and do I need to sit there and bake in extra opportunity costs? You can say I'm just thinking that could this be some one tweak in the approach?
I can provide a quick answer to that, and I'd say currently the dispatch resultant from this kind of constraints is not included in the BCR calculations. FERC has found that to be consistent with their principles, and I think as we explore a little bit in the paper that we put in December, really the key modification that may allow for the ISO to consider revisiting some of these constraints is really related to AS reoptimization in real time, right? Because these constraints are the way in which the ISO can ensure that storage resources will be able to meet those tariff requirements of being able to provide at least 30 minutes of those awards. Without the constraints, we wouldn't be able to ensure that operationally, unless we even if we probably had something like full reoptimization, even then we'd need to see if relaxation of those constraints is viable. And we explained that a bit in detail in the paper as to kind of why today this is not considered in BCR, the reasoning that FERC accepted and supported, and the current trade-off that the way to really do away with that would be to pursue something that is quite material, right? Like is reoptimization in real time doesn't just mean 15-minute, it might mean 5-minute, it means development of lots of analyses and being able to ensure delivery of AS, et cetera. So I think that's really where this is coming from.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I see one hand from Callie. Let's take that, and then we'll go on to our next topic.
Jeff, is my audio better this time?
Way better, yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. I just have an ask and then just a quick comment. So my ask is, I believe you guys implemented the BCR changes in December. Do I have that accurate?
The modified real-time calculation?
Yes. Yeah, the one that
Yeah.
that was developed kind of during that faster stakeholder process.
Yeah, that was implemented in Q4 of last year, yeah.
Okay, so my ask would be if there's any way in maybe the next iteration or once we have, a month or two worth of data to kind of look to see how that is changing the BCR that we're seeing. And the reason for my ask is, I think Don had mentioned it earlier, obviously we have EDAM and DAME coming, introducing all new products, new costs in the market. I think in your next couple slides, you're talking about exploring changing how storage resources are being bid into the market in general. That's kind of one of the main reasons why we've always kind of said, let's pause on this. Let's give it some time, especially because we have something that's already implemented that was developed, I think it was about a year ago, and kind of focus on some of the other items first. So I just wanted to throw that out there because there's obviously a lot of questions and a lot of changes coming that I would hate for us to kind of spend a lot of time and effort going down a path, then these changes get put in place and we're back here again having very similar conversations around, do we need to make changes to BCR for storage? So just wanted to throw that out there, reiterate that comment, but also primarily make the ask of if we can get some updated analysis, especially since the real-time BCR calculations have changed.
Yeah, thank you for that, Callie. This is actually a great opportunity for me to plug next week's MPPF meetings. I think there will be some information on this presented there as well. And we'll make sure to incorporate data from that, or if there's other data in future iterations of this conversation to give people a sense of what's going on with that updated calculus. But yeah, I think the meeting, the MPPF next week, I believe is Tuesday or Wednesday. Should be on our calendar. And yeah, there'll be some more information on that. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah. And whatever they present there, if you can obviously fold that into this conversation in case,
Yeah.
some holders aren't able to attend both, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll have an update on that too in Feb, either if it's just the MPPF slides or if there's additional data we can provide, then we'll include it as well. Appreciate the opportunity for plugging that in, and I see Brenda put it in the chat, so that's great.
All right, thanks.
Okay, I'm not seeing other hands. Let's move on to our next topic. And as I mentioned before earlier in this meeting, I think it was during our November and December meeting, a couple of stakeholders raised this question of, we've been talking, kind of alluding to through different conversations and other postings in this initiative, we have been alluding to this notion of a biddable state of charge model, very much related to the ESR concept that was shared before, a couple of years back, actually. And we have heard this ask that I mentioned at the beginning of the call of, let's do a refresher on this. Let's like reignite this conversation so that people kind of have a mental image of what we're talking about when we refer to it, and that they can also weigh in on the relevance, the opportunity, the applicability of this concept, so that we can keep thinking through it and, of course, inform our discussions, as Callie was mentioning, for example. So in this slides, what I have included is kind of an overview of the current NGR model, how we model storage and some of the challenges we've seen and we've identified with the perspective of stakeholders, internal to the or external stakeholders, yeah. And then I'll go on the concept of the ESR model, how it's different, how it addresses some of the challenges, some of its potential benefits. And for this section, I'm joined by my colleague, Juan Alvarez Lopez. Many of you may have talked to him before. So he'll be in the panel with me to see if there's any questions I may err on to correct me as needed. So thank you, Juan, for joining. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, so this should be very familiar to the majority of the people in the audience here. When we think about battery energy storage resource, really we model them using the NGR model. The NGR model's key assumptions are that this is a resource that can provide negative generation, positive generation continuously through its whole range of state of charge and through its whole range from Pmax to Pmin, as we've discussed in the nonlinearity conversation, right? So when we think of the NGR model, the way that these resources are participating, they do so submitting monotonically increasing bit curves, which really just means, we're looking at a kind of the steps that go up the further right you go. And these bit curves are defined in terms of megawatts and dollars per megawatt hour pairs. In this graphical representation, what we're showing is basically a 10-segment bit curve that is showing different megawatts and dollars per megawatt hour pairings, 5 of them on the charging side, 5 of them on the discharging side, and the difference between the highest segment to charge and the lowest segment to discharge is what we think of as the bit spread, right? The smallest difference that would make it, based on the bit curve, worthwhile for the asset to charge and later discharge, that difference in pricing. So this NGR modeling is consistent really with, generally consistent with what we do for other resources, right? We think of their bits in terms of megawatts, and we do the same for the ramp, right? Today, when we think of the ramping capability of these resources, we're really thinking about what the resource can achieve in terms of megawatts per minute, dependent on the megawatt output of the assets. So you can see here in the blue, the graph with the blue lines at top. And similarly, we think about the 5-minute ramp-up capability of the resource as, again, dependent on that megawatt output where they're at. This creates some challenges because, as I mentioned today, the bit curve and ramp capability, we think of them as functions of megawatts, not as functions of state of charge. And this is a limitation because, as many of you are well aware, the costs faced by storage assets are really largely state of charge dependent. It's also a challenge because it makes it difficult for market participants to ensure that the bids they're submitting are consistent with the cost and operational limitations they'll face given their state of charge. And this is because of that difference between the time where bidding closes and where the operating hour occurs, which Balu was referring to before, right? So in the current NGR paradigm, we really have resources submitting bid curves that are an approximation of their cost because it's not taking into account that SOC dependency, and that are also a best approximation of where they expect that SOC will be over an hour ahead in time, right? Another couple of challenges that come from the NGR model is that, as we've discussed earlier today, we're not really modeling the impacts of nonlinearity as these assets reach their state of charge limits. And because of that, some of the dispatch instructions may not be feasible, and it really requires scheduling coordinators to be really on top of providing real-time information in the form of outages so that dispatch instructions are feasible. So what I'm really trying to do with this couple of slides is separate the problem. You know, the first set of challenges are more so related to recognizing state of charge dependency. The second set of challenges are more so related to recognizing that nonlinearity or fallback effect, which is not unique to the SOC dependency, to the SOC dependent modeling of costs and ramps. No, it's more so dependent to being able to capture that Pmax, Pmin is a function of state of charge. So I'm trying to split them a little bit. The ESR model concept is pretty different. First, as you can see, it's really trying to, rather than have a single stepwise function for charging and discharging that is monotonically increasing, instead of having that, we now would have effectively two curves. And these curves are no longer represented in terms of megawatts per dollar megawatt hour pair. They're now represented in the megawatt hours where the megawatt hours as the state of charge in which the resource is at, and dollars per megawatt hour paired. So this is a big change in two ways. First, we would be able to think of or visualize, model the assets as basically, rather than having a single asset that can go just from charge to discharge within that single bit curve, we'd basically be able to model these two ranges separately, right? We'd be able to model the charging range and the discharging range separately. And that will allow us to be able to better represent the costs of charging or discharging depending on the state of charge that the resource is at. This model also allows, obviously, for transition, basically seamless transition between the charge or discharge states, because that is kind of the upgrade of let's say, the NGR model over other paradigms where we would be able to model load and supply, right? So here, we're not losing that ability to seamlessly transition, and what we are gaining is the ability to decouple those costs at the different levels of state of charge in the charge side and in the discharge side. If you look at this graphic representation, you'll see that the bit spread is again determined by the difference between the lowest bid for the asset to discharge, which is here in the far left, and the highest bid to charge, which is here on the far right. So that is the bid spread. While looking at this graph too, I'd like to underscore, and I probably should have started there, I apologize, that here the x-axis is probably better to read it very carefully, right? Because what would appear to be the origin of the graph is not really the zero of the x-axis. We're really going from the highest, the upper state of charge, to the lower state of charge as we move on the x-axis. And what you can see is that basically at very high state of charge, in the left side of the graph, the asset has a quite low cost to discharge because it's pretty full. No, it's not as costly for the asset to do so. And conversely, it has a higher cost to discharge as the state of charge gets depleted. And the inverse, again, occurs with the charge. As we have lower state of charge, the asset is way more willing to charge, so it has a higher dollar per megawatt hour read there. And as the asset gets increasingly fuller, it would have a way lower willingness to keep charging. This framework is what it's really trying to capture is the fact that we know that storage resources have different costs that they face at different levels of state of charge. In this example, in this graphical example, we're showing it just as the example for NGR, where we had 5 charge segments and 5 discharge segments. Here, we have the same, it's just that they are represented, kind of stacked on top of one another because they are SOC dependent, right? So we basically would have at different levels of state of charge, we'd have different price pairing per megawatt hour, and that recognizes that variable, the fact that this costs are really a function of SOC. We are also able, in this model and this concept, we're also able to make the ramp capability be based on those megawatt hours. So in the prior slide where we showed this for NGR, you'd see that the x-axis was basically a megawatt value, where around the middle of the x-axis we had 0, and basically meant that lower or higher of the megawatt output of the resource, that would determine the megawatt hour per minute ramp. Here we now have it as what are the megawatt hours that the resource has stored will determine that megawatt hour per minute ramp rate function. And you can see it in the bottom graph represented specifically for the 5-minute ramp-up capability, how as the state of charge of the resource progresses, as it moves along the x-axis, that 5-minute ramp-up capability also varies. Very much showing, that fact that in the extremes you'd have different potential that in the bulk of the state of charge. Before I continue, I also did want to note that it's George has joined us as a panelist as well, in case there's any questions for him that he might be able to field. Thank you very much for your time, George. Yeah. Okay. So in the ESR model, in this concept, the megawatts that are dispatched are really a function of state of charge. We, as I mentioned before, would have the ability to have, we're modeling the resource kind of, I'd like to think of it as like we're unfolding the resource. Now we're modeling it a bit more in detail as what is its charge side and its discharge side. But we are also maintaining that ability to transition. And we do that by being able to include this variable that is a binary variable that allows us to determine the status variable of the state of charge. And that makes it so that we are preventing the possibility for, conflicting simultaneous charging and discharging. We are also in this, with this ability of being able to separate them, we might be able to simplify a little bit the amount of segments that are utilized by in total. No? So today, if we go back to this slide, we have 5 segments for charge, 5 for discharge. When we think about it in terms of the ESR concept, we might actually have fewer ranges of state of charge where the cost dynamics are different. So perhaps it would be sufficient for resources, let's say, to have one segment or step that is focused on very low state of charge, another one that is focused on, let's say, 20 to 80, and another one that is focused in very high state of charge. So in this graphical representation, just because we've included, again, 5 segments per charge and discharge, doesn't necessarily mean that those are the sweet spot of as many as might be needed, since while the costs are state of charge dependent, they don't seem to vary as much within, let's say, the midsection of the state of charge range. Okay, the final piece that I've included here around the ESR model should be very, very familiar to those that joined at the beginning of this call, because it's really this representation of nonlinearity or foldback that we think we can incorporate as part of the NGR model as well. But this model would also have it, and it would be able to represent or consider that as you get closer to empty, the battery cannot reach Pmax. As you get closer to full, the battery could not reach Pmin. So overall, we view this concept as better recognizing the nature of storage resources, the fact that their costs and operational capabilities are directly related to state of charge. There are functions of it. This would allow a better direct representation of that, particularly in terms of their bids and ramp rates. And it will also facilitate, on our end, on the ISO's perspective, the enforcement of constraints related to state of charge. So, for example, we have the end-of-hour state of charge parameter that resources can submit and that the market will respect and ensure that it will reach the range specified by the scheduling coordinator. Today, because of how we model NGRs, the way to enforce that constraint is a bit roundabout, but here we'll be able to enforce that directly since the key variable is in those terms of megawatt hours. So we'd be able to ease enforcement of reaching that target at any given interval or of holding a given state of charge for a period of time. And finally, I think the last bullet I have here is really about the nonlinearity, which I've tried to separate as part of the conversation precisely because we think that's an enhancement that we could also pursue within NGR. But it's really an added piece as well for this ESR model to make sure that we are representing these resources a bit more faithfully to their characteristics. We really think that kind of as other as stakeholders have raised during this call, and it's good that we think of the changes and policies that we are analyzing or conceptualizing with an eye on the future, so that we are not continuously going back to do, let's say, retrofits to some degree. So we really want to share this so as to meet that ask for a refresher from some stakeholders, but also get people thinking on this as an alternative model to storage resources that includes significant improvements and that we think will be quite attractive to resolve some of the challenges that we've noted, such as the timeline of bidding and the representation of costs more faithfully. I will pause here. I see there's a hand. I pause maybe before we go into the hands to see if my colleagues, Juan, George, if you have any thoughts, anything to add, and of course any corrections in case you think something should be clarified or restated. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm not hearing any from our colleagues, our ISO colleagues, so let's go with questions. And if in those you feel like you'd like to chime in, please feel free to do so. Let's start with Alva. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. This is Alva from PG&E. Just a couple of things I'm curious about your thinking on. In real time, assuming that you're bidding in real time, would you allow for, since basically if you know where you're going to be at the start of an hour, then you can only move in one direction and another 1 hour's worth of state of charge. So for a 4-hour battery, 1/4 of your energy up or down. Would it make sense for the bid range not to include the upper and lower state of charge range, but rather to only cover a subset of that range, and then perhaps the user would put the bids in with more granularity over that range? I mean, is there a reason to have the bid go outside of a range that you can't get to, is sort of my question there.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alva. I think George will answer. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Sergio. Hello, Alva. This is George Angelides.
Hi, George.
So you could restrict the operation of the resource based on the bid that the scheduling coordinator can submit in Cyber for that hour. So some section of the SOC can be not even represented in the bid. I think that's what you were suggesting. However, because you don't know exactly where the resource is going to be optimally dispatched, I think providing the entire range will give you more benefit. It will maximize the participation of the resource in the market, because during the hour you have 4 15-minute intervals and 12 5-minute intervals, and this model can actually switch from charging to discharging as optimization dictates from one interval to the next. So it may be at times hard to determine how much of the state of charge would be available to support energy bid at the extreme ranges, but you don't have to do that. You can bid the entire range of your SOC, and with the ability to price it properly, particularly at the edges of the SOC range, you are probably you have the best scenario of covering all your costs and maximizing the participation of the resource.
Might be a recommended approach. I think one thing that gave me the idea was sort of what Sergio was talking about, that maybe you would be constraining those SOC limits as part of your management of the future state of charge of the resource, the way Sergio was talking about it. So that there might be times when you'd want to offer the full range, but there certainly might be times when you'd want to offer only a subset of the range. My other question was, does this model prevent you from offering regulation up and down in the same hour, essentially?
No, it doesn't, because regulation is dispatched by the AGC. The market does not dispatch regulation, and regulation can be above and below the dispatch. So whether the resource is discharging or charging, it can carry both regulation up and regulation down. It has a set point, which is determined by the schedule, which could be charging or it could be discharging based on the economic participation in the market, and AGC can move it up and down based on its awarded regulation up and regulation down margin.
So even if your set point is zero, even the constraint on being in the charge or discharge state is separate from whether you can so there's basically a different model for regulation than there is for the energy, essentially, is what you're saying. For regulation, you can go up or down continuously, but for the actual schedule, you would be in a charge or discharge state in each interval.
Yes, the market, of course, will make sure that it will enforce still the state of charge constraints, making sure that there is enough state of charge to support regulation award in one way or the other, and all the other state of charge constraints that we have today for the storage resources, they're still they still apply here on these models. But if there is sufficient state of charge to support a regulation award and sufficient capacity, the market will award regulation if it's economic, and it doesn't matter whether the resource is scheduled to charge or discharge. If you have the range available and the SOC available, you can get awards on both directions.
Thanks, George.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we can go with Michael Kramick.
Just a quick question. So in real time, what would happen to this model if the telemetry between the battery and the ISO was down and state of charge was not being sent to the ISO through the telemetry?
That's a good question, Michael. So obviously when we have telemetry, we'll use it because it's more accurate than estimating where the state of charge is. If the telemetry is bad or we don't receive the telemetry, the model can estimate the state of charge based on the previous dispatch history, because as the resource is dispatched, assuming that the resource is following that dispatch, then you can calculate the state of charge at the beginning of its interval, and more importantly, the binding interval that you're issuing dispatch instructions. For example, you see here in this figure, the blue area under the charging bid is the accumulation of state of charge. So as the resource charges from right to left, that blue area is the state of charge that is accumulated within the device. And similarly, on the discharge side, on the red curve, you see a pale red or pink area under it. That's the state of charge that is depleted while the resource is discharging. So the market obviously has the history of the dispatch of the resource as it's charging and discharging, so it can estimate what is the state of charge at the device at the beginning of the market run. And then, if we have the benefit of having the SOC telemetry, the market uses that as a more accurate way to determine the SOC at the beginning of the interval. If it's slacking, it will fall back to using the calculation based on how the resource has been dispatched so far, assuming that it's following the last dispatch instruction. Okay?
And if
helpful.
I may,
I would just say that on extreme days, if either a large set of storage assets loses telemetry or a large asset loses telemetry, making assumptions and then solving the market around those assumptions, so you're making assumptions that storage is following, and you're solving the market interval after interval with assumptions. I'm just saying you need to be careful because, if it's on one of these peak days, the market pricing could be being set by assumptions that aren't accurate. But I definitely like the idea of, obviously, if you don't have it, you have to have a backup plan. So thank you.
Yeah, and if I can add something here.
Go ahead, Sergio. Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something to Michael's point, because I wanted to note that what George described is the current setup as well, but with another step. Currently, if we didn't have telemetry, we'd still kind of reconstruct and estimate the SOC, but we do it via the megawatt length. So we're also taking that additional step of translating the megawatt hour to megawatts and vice versa, so as to be able to get that picture of the modeled estimated SOC. Here, we do the same, but it would be directly in terms of megawatt hours. So I would say, my understanding, is that's currently what we do, but with that extra translation. Here, we'd also be able to further simplify that, which kind of gets to the point of, one of the benefits being the enforcement of constraints, or here we should maybe read in, and the estimation of projections, now they're directly on state of charge terms. Yeah. Okay, I see Michael put his hand down. I am not seeing any other hands at this point. Let's give our colleagues or stakeholders another 30 seconds or so. Oh, Alva's back. Let's go with Alva. Yeah.
Yeah, just what do you since clearly you and George have thought through this, what are you estimating the amount of effort involved in implementing this, and is this something that would come in 2027 if there were a press on it, or 2028, or is it just simply multiple years down the road? What are you seeing the effort involved here?
Alva, if I can answer this question. Compared to the existing NGR model, this is a more complicated model. It provides advantages, as we explained here, at the expense of higher effort in implementing it, and it's also it has higher performance requirements, but it's certainly we have implemented more complicated models like this, like the multi-state model. So in terms of effort, it will take some effort to design this completely. It has some good features. We managed to do it with a single binary variable, so we don't have the performance impact of having multiple binary variables for each segment here on the bid. So it has, from that perspective, the same complexity with the NGR model, but the interaction of the transitions from the charging to the discharging bit in the objective function, they need a little bit of finesse and some more work to do it from a design perspective. It is a little bit more performance driven. It has more performance requirements, but it's not prohibitive. So overall, I have a good feeling on implementing this. I don't think it will be a bottleneck compared to other things that we have done. Now, on the timeline, of course, all this depends on when we're going to wrap up in the stakeholder process everything that is detailed about this model. And there are details that need to be examined, like the bid cost recovery, if the existing approach applies with no changes to this particular model. And as you know, the bid cost recovery details are also part of the stakeholder engagement. We may change those, so we have to see how they're carefully applied to this. There are other issues that we may need to examine. RA participation or other satellite elements that come into the picture, because this is a new model. We have to make sure that all the existing processes are compatible with it. So it really depends on how the stakeholder process will continue and wrap up on this, and I'll let Sergio comment on this. But I don't have major concerns on the implementation.
Yeah, thank you for that, George. I would just add that part of why we wanted to put forth this topic, right at the beginning of the year and think through it, is that we definitely wanted to inform, or at least be reflected, considered in the materials that we'll develop and the papers we'll put out later in this year. So as you can see, in our schedule of April through August, all these papers have this element of SOC management within it, seeking to represent that notion of having consideration of this model, this path within our discussions as they relate to Uplift and DEB, so that we can make sure we start checking off those conversations, those boxes that merit discussion, as George was saying. I would also add that, in the presentation of this section of this topic, we kind of noted that this is really a bit of a twofold part. Like, the one part is moving towards this megawatt-hour based approach within the ESR concept. The other part is also this piece of nonlinearity that now we think we could also include in the NGR realm. So in that regard, there are already some efforts that we're thinking of that wouldn't be necessarily duplicative, because they'd be able to be leveraged in the different models. But of course, the key part of the complexity really comes from having a new pathway that is in terms of state of charge from the ground up, and we want to be able to weave in that conversation through this year, so that we can make sure we're thinking all of these elements through. So hopefully that gives you a bit more robustness there. Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like we would expect then that you'll give the CAISO's picture of the timeline that would be required in the straw proposal and the revised straw proposal, and then stakeholders would make their judgment. And then this is also under the heading of new market initiatives, and it would be put onto that timeline, that roadmap as well. Am I correct, or is this would this be sequestered from that?
So this topic of biddable SOC concepts we've kind of had that housed in this initiative for a while. I think we've mainly have focused on other elements around it, like last year that we talked about SOC management and capacity awards, or we focused on other topic groups. So we see this as kind of included, this ESR concept or biddable SOC concept included within this effort. We want to just make sure that we keep advancing it in step, in alignment with what we're working on Uplift and Debs, so that much to what Callie said, for example, before, so that if we keep going, discussing this route, later we don't come back and have to redesign Uplift for that new pathway or redesign the Deb for that pathway. Let's make sure that things can work cohesively together. Does that help, Allah?
Yeah, so it's all embedded in one common timeline, and we can expect to see in the straw proposal and the proposal how you would your best effort at how you think it would fit in a timeline at that point, and participants will then weigh in as they have been. That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, let me check the chat to see if there's been any questions so far. I'm not seeing any. We have
no chat questions at this time.
Okay. So I'm going to go forward again to kind of where I left the presentation. Before we get to our next step slides, I'll give another couple minutes of a minute or so of opportunity to see if folks have any questions or thoughts. Again, a manner of kind of recapping some of the next steps that Brenda will also touch on. In the coming days, you'll see more on that expected paper on mixed fuel and distribution level resources. And then in February, we'll have an updated materials on outage management, including this nonlinearity piece we discussed today. And in our meeting for February, we'll discuss that paper and that updated posting, that paper, and we'll do the focus really will be a deep dive on the default energy bid concepts and potential enhancements that a lot of virtually all stakeholders supported, kind of focusing on that. So this first meeting, we wanted to really focus on nonlinearity and that holistic discussions and PCR and ESR. The next one will be all about Debs and hopefully wrapping up that outage management topic group now that we have a modeled idea for nonlinearity. And that'll put us right on pace to keep working on our materials moving forward. So I'm not seeing any other hands, and I've seen some people are dropping off. So maybe we can, I'll pass it back to you, Brenda. Won't no longer need to be presenter. You can take it over, and we can go through the next steps. And thank you all very much, and Happy New Year. It's pretty late, but I haven't talked to some of you since the other year. So Happy New Year, and good to see you back. Yeah.
Thank you, Sergio. We appreciate your expertise on this topic as well. We have a few updates, as Sergio had mentioned. I added the next steps on a different layout, as previously mentioned on slide 12. So we are hopefully planning tentatively to post the paper, and then also with that comment template along with that, and a few stakeholder meetings along the year. We do plan to notice them ahead of time and give folks enough opportunity to add those to the calendars. If you do see any meetings that are being put on the tentative calendar ahead of time, please reach out to us. We want to make sure some of those dates aligned with your business and the timing. So we have been able to move things around based on feedback or emails sent to us ahead of time for the meetings that we can actually move ahead of time. And then, so with that, we do have one more slide on the next one. Energy Blog Matters, we have posted the most up-to-date stakeholder process guide. We definitely invite you to review that. We will be utilizing a lot of that process guidelines to continue providing our papers and presentations ahead of time to our stakeholders, and also utilize any comments submitted. So we hope to definitely work with everyone and this year with a lot of new items coming up, and then also that virtual town hall coming up, I believe next week as well. So a lot of more updates coming your way as we move forward for the year. But at this time, I see everyone dropping off. We'll go ahead and pass it to Stacy, my event producer, to kindly end her call. Thank you, and Happy New Year.
Okay, that concludes our conference. You may now disconnect.